Welcome, everybody. We are here again with our Research Talk Qualitative Conversation series. We are honored to have with us today Elaine Keane, who is going to be talking to us about her Summer Intensive 2025 courses. Today, we're going to be focusing on her course Planning and Designing a Qualitative Project, and that will be offered July 21st and 22nd. At the conclusion of this video, we'll have a slide that gives you more information about how to read more about that course and also register if you so choose. So I'm here today in conversation with Elaine, but with me are two of my colleagues, Paul Mihas, who is with ResearchTalk, but also his primary job is with the Odum Institute. And Paul, if you can introduce yourself to everybody.
Thanks, Ray. Yes, I'm Paul Mihas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Odum Institute for Research and Social Science at UNC Chapel Hill. And I've also been a consultant at ResearchTalk for a couple decades now.
Wonderful, and we are lucky to have you. And then also we are lucky to have Jeff Petruzzelli. If Jeff, you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Jeff Petruzzelli with ResearchTalk. I'm a qualitative research specialist here, and like Paul, I've been working with ResearchTalk for a couple of decades.
Great. And then Elaine, do you have the expression wear multiple hats? We have this whole expression where people balance, and juggle several different roles like you do. So anyway, why don't you give just first your introduction of who you are and your professional affiliation and job, and then we'll switch gears and talk about the course.
I will do. That's great. Thanks, Ray. So I'm Elaine Keane. I'm professor in Sociology of Education and Research Methods in the School of Education, University of Galway, where I am also, for my sins, as we say in Ireland, head of the discipline of education. I'm here 21 years now, but I have long had a really strong interest in qualitative research methodologies, and it's been my passion to teach it. So this is my second year involved, as you know, with ResearchTalk, and I'm thrilled to be here and really looking forward to these courses.
Wonderful. So you are teaching for us again in our spring qualitative seminar series, and we'll have a video available for folks on that. That's the Introduction to Grounded Theory course, which you taught for us last year to fabulous reception. So this year, the courses you're teaching are topics that are very well known to you and things that you've taught several people before, but first time that we're kind of constructing them. Basically you constructed them with kind of a little bit of advice from us, but so we're looking forward to hearing you chat about the Planning and Designing a Qualitative Project course. And we wanted just to get right into what's in the course for folks who will enroll. So when you think about it, what does somebody get if they sit through this 2-day course with you? Yeah.
Wow, where to start? Well, I'm so excited about this because, as I mentioned, I have long taught qualitative research in general, not just grounded theory. And I'm also really at heart, I'm a real planner, probably too much of a planner, I think, in my everyday life, but it works well in terms of research. So planning is something I always really emphasize. And what I really like about the kind of focus of this course is it's going to allow us, I think, to kind of take a wide angle approach as well as an in-depth approach, because it allows us to talk through the whole research life cycle, I think, from start to finish, but from a planning perspective, which I think is quite unique in terms, I mean, I think if you look at the sorts of course offerings that are available to, excuse me, doctoral researchers and early career researchers, or even, people who are looking to get to refresh their skills, it often looks at a particular skill or a particular aspect of the research cycle. But here we're doing the whole thing, but from a planning perspective. And I think, a really important focus for researchers is, I mean, we all, I think, realize, and certainly early career researchers ought to know that for an empirical project to be successful, really significant and detailed planning is vital. Even, of course, in qualitative projects, which sometimes are seen to be, well, they are indeed marked by a more flexible approach. They are indeed more evolving in nature. But one thing that I think often surprises early career researchers is that doesn't mean that we don't plan, and one thing I'll be stressing is that flexibility and an evolving kind of project approach does not mean lack of planning. In fact, what I found in my experience is that because of the flexible nature of and the evolving nature of qualitative research, actually in advance we need better advanced planning skills for the multiple possibilities which might arise. So by taking this course, one of the skills that I'm going to be trying to engender in colleagues that participate is that they will kind of, I suppose, learn to anticipate and to advance plan the core aspects of their study, that they learn the skills to sort of predict the overall time frame that might be necessary relative to their central research question, to try and think about how to devise quality and adequate data generation processes, and of course, how to appropriately sequence those, because that can be a complicated business and that absolutely affects the time frame and how we plan and how all of that matches on to the overall project's objectives. So as I said, in a sense, we really are looking at that kind of whole life cycle of the research process, but always coming back to it from a planning perspective and trying to predict. So there'll be an awful lot of very, I think, practical activities, where one of the things I love doing with my students and my doctoral students, for example, is saying, right, what's our end point? Let's find that, let's plot it, and now let's work backwards. And of course, risk management. Where do we plot all of the core activities and what might happen and what might not happen in the field? So I think I love the focus on planning and designing here, because it gives us an opportunity to think about the whats, the what ifs, and the what if nots, and to try and plot a course of action and I think that takes a lot of the anxiety out of the equation, particularly for beginning researchers who may be sitting at home wondering, what if this, what if that? So I think if we can plan in advance for the what ifs, that tends to work really, really well.
I love when you brought it to anxiety just now. It brought me immediately back to what you said earlier about the planning is really kind of anticipation to predict. And I may be reading too much here, but it seems like that anticipation to predict probably is one of the key factors that can lessen that anxiety.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's completely normal to be anxious. When I start a new project, I'm anxious. Oh, what's going to happen with this? And will this happen? And I don't know about other people, but usually the anxiety lessens a little bit for me once I have my data, because then I'm like, okay, it's just up to me from now on. But having said that, so much of that anxiety can be taken away, or at least tempered to an appropriate level, if we engage in proper planning. Now, I do think some people can be a little bit surprised by how much advanced planning and detailed consideration is needed. And it's not always that we can make definitive decisions, but we do need to explore possibilities and to play with them and to think, okay, how would this work out if? So I think, there's a lot going on in qualitative research. There's so many different methods, there's so many different possibilities and sequences. So it's about putting some control on that, I think, from the start, that can be very, very helpful.
You're so intentional with your choice of words as you're expressing this, and consideration is so well chosen. And that fits this whole idea of kind of going in flow, lots of decisions made as you move that may differ slightly than what you anticipated. But again, with anticipation and consideration, it's a wonderful, instructive language you're putting forward. I want to check in, and as we're going, with Jeff, if we want to check in with you first, and then Paul, give you opportunity to join the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Elaine, I was just wondering, obviously there's a wide range of different qualitative methodologies and different types of ways that people use their work. So I'm just wondering, in the class, is it even necessary to address, but how do you address people that are kind of coming at qualitative from different angles in terms of planning? Are there different ways to plan if you're doing grounded theory versus, something else?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great question. Thank you, Jeff, because I will indeed be focusing on that. I think it's really important. And actually, I think we had this conversation a little bit before, Ray, about how, in the qualitative research world, there has been a sort of a shift from, these overarching grand qualitative methodologies towards kind of looser approaches that are used. And rather than avoiding that, I tend to tackle that head on actually with researchers and, to talk about the importance of, look, if you are actually doing, one of the so-called big methodologies like grounded theory or phenomenology or, a very specific ethnographic approach, I do talk about the importance of, okay, well, we need to know which one, which school, what are the parameters expected within that approach? What are the key features that one is expected to adhere to and to implement in terms of processes? And you really have to know those. And I talk to students about those. And I certainly wouldn't be an expert in all of those methodologies, but I say if you're going to adopt one of those, you really need to become an expert therein because that's a key part of planning. For example, in grounded theory, as I talk about in the spring course, we need that staged iterative approach to data collection and analysis, and you need to plan for theoretical sampling. And you need to know very clearly the sorts of time frames that are likely to apply to different stages and what will be involved. So one of the things I will absolutely do is to talk a little bit about those kind of the grand methodologies, if you like, and the sorts of time frame and planning implications that arise from adhering to one of those. But, I will also be very much talking about more general qualitative frameworks, because a lot of researchers don't necessarily do one of the big ones, if you like, and that's absolutely fine. But I will talk as well about the more general qualitative frameworks, the kind of underpinning philosophies even of those, and the implications of those, because one of the key implications that I see in the last, 10, 20 years in qualitative research is, for example, the implications for research design of engaging in critical reflexivity for researchers regarding positionality and other things. And something that often isn't done well is people journal. They talk about their positionality, but they don't actually consider the implications of that positionality for research design. That's something that's not done as well. And one of the reasons it's not done as well is because it's not thought about during planning. And then when you get to the particular point, I think often it's nearly too late to do the thing that is necessary. So that's something that I'm going to look at actually, is to look, as a fundamental ethos, I suppose, of qualitative research, the emphasis on critical reflexivity. And what that means for qualitative projects and what that might mean for different steps in the research process from a planning perspective.
Beautiful. Paul, what are you curious about as we're
So I just
talking?
want to underscore what you just said about positionality. I think I think planning and designing a study is sort of an exercise in getting to know yourself better as a researcher. And I think that that's exactly what you're talking about with positionality, is that I think that a lot of times people are they don't realize what they're resisting or what they're drawn to in a study. But as soon as they have to be intentional about design, they realize what they're perhaps avoiding or what they're really drawn to. And I think sort of balancing those things in, learning how to kind of move into territories that we're maybe not as comfortable with, I think is super important. I think you're really hitting on that with positionality.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and I think it's so complex and it encompasses so many of the aspects that you speak to there. I mean, I think it will be just probably one aspect of this course, obviously, because there's so much else to do in planning. But I will exactly be trying to, and I think you're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head there. There is a resistance to focusing on issues of positionality because we're all, I think, fundamentally resistant to the tough work that's involved in that domain. Even amongst qualitative researchers that may be a little bit more aligned to that way of thinking. And this is tough work. And I think when researchers realize that this isn't just the kind of soft journaling about me, but it's about, what that means for what I bring to the study and the really tricky stuff about what that means for what I think I'm doing when I'm generating data and interpreting it, and how I bring myself to that process. Because, the fundamental issues of bias and what that means in qualitative research, I think presents a lot of challenges for researchers. So there are honest conversations I think that we can have there that very much lend themselves to thinking about this issue.
As I listen through, Elaine, I keep thinking of the image of threads, and there's so much that you're presenting that threads through the course, but necessarily threads through a project. And you mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation today that one of the things you'll be doing in the course is kind of having this kind of wide angle view, but then getting more focused. And it seems like this is a part of it, is not just what do you need to do at each phase, but what do you need to keep in mind through the life of. And that's not, by no means is it just one thread, right? There's multiple aspects that people have to really be attentive to through the life of their project.
For sure. And it's about admitting as well and being honest that we need a pre-existing thread. We, deliberately and intentionally design a project and plan it to the best of our ability at the start. And that is there as a framework, but it has to be flexible. We all know, when we get into the field, things change, storms happen, participants drop out, etc., etc. So, it's about, I think, that's why part of planning, it can't be this rigid framework. We need to learn to respond as researchers to conditions in the field, and to the evolving nature of our project as well. We all know as well that really interesting data that starts coming out of the field sometimes fundamentally reorients a research question in a really important way. So I think it's about having conversations about that being okay, and that being more than okay, that being actually fundamentally aligned to the ethos of qualitative research. So that having the thread, but they're flexible threads. They're strong, but they're still flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, when you talk about kind of what occurs outside of your own day, we have someone working on a project related to disaster prep. And
Ah,
started that project, started collecting data, and then hurricanes throughout the United States. She's here in North Carolina, so hurricanes in the west part of our coast and the fires in California. So yeah, and then we've had people over the years, and for us too, I know when I did my dissertation work, there was a publication of a book that I didn't anticipate, Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. And I was doing a study of friendship at the time. So there's all sorts of stuff that you can't know that in some
yes.
way relates, and then therefore you have to integrate into your decision making. When we think more, you've done a great job in presenting real practical takeaways from the course, the lessening anxiety. I was just wondering if there was anything else that you can see if somebody finishes. We always have this vision of they take the course and then they go
Yeah.
back and they're working at their desk. What do you think that might look different in someone's work practice as a result of having spent 2 days learning with you?
Well, I would really like them to have a very basic Word document with a two-column table where we have plotted out, if they don't have a particular project in mind, that's absolutely fine, but they might be inspired, you never know from our conversations. And if they do have a project, we're going to name it. We're going to, have an end date of some description, and we're going to work backwards. So I'd like them to have a sort of a map in a table with broadly plotted out key activities, appropriately sequenced, with maybe some backup activities here and there, the what ifs and so on, attending to risks and so forth as we go out, so that they actually have this page at the end of the course on a project that gives them a sort of a map. This is okay. I thought that what I wanted to do was this, but I can see that that would take actually 3 years. I have 9 months. I have $5,000 in funding or whatever it is. And because that's, I think, part of the conversation as well, is what is realistic in the time frame and with the, whatever financial frameworks within which I'm dealing as a researcher. So it's to try and to map this out in a coherent way, in a meaningful way. with all of the different factors and to see, okay, this is doable. And if I really want to look at this topic, this is, I can only do 20 interviews and maybe some focus groups. I can't also do X, Y, and Z. So it's about looking at feasibility, I think, fundamentally as well. I think the participants will go away with a sense of what's feasible, what's reasonable, and what will be meaningful to actually achieve in the sort of project timeframe that they're thinking of.
It's beautiful. So it sounds like not just people will learn to plan and design, but one of the hardest things in any profession really is how do you become a good decision maker specific to what you're doing and your expertise? That sounds like for folks who may not even be planning right away, one of the benefits you get out of this course is really thinking what it means to be a methodological decision maker, at the planning stage, and a part of that is thinking through each phase as you progress. That's really empowering for people in the course. So
Precisely. And I think what's really important as well is, I don't know about you, but it's often when I say things out loud that I realize the implications of things a little bit more. When things are rushing around in our head,
yeah,
they often don't seem real or tangible. So one of the things I like to do in these sorts of exercises, build in time for people to share, what they're thinking about a project. And I think by listening to other professionals and other colleagues talk about a project and what they're thinking of doing, as we're speaking, we can suddenly say and often realize, actually, that, of course, that won't work, will it? Because whereas sometimes when it's all going around in our head, it reads very differently. So I'd like definitely to build in time for people to share where they're, for those for whom it's relevant, to share what they're thinking and to actually to workshop
yeah.
their considered approach.
Yeah, and that's a great way for everyone who's listening to other folks in the course. It's a great way to read
Exactly.
what they're learning. Anyone, Jeff, Paul, or Elaine, want to say? That was a wonderful wrap right there, but I just want to give space in case there's anything anyone wants to point out or um, mention before we close our conversation for today. Well, thank you so much, Elaine. It's you really positioned this really well, and I can't wait for July. It'll be here before we know. We hear from folks after they finish and things like that, but I think that people this is the type of course that people will gain immediate benefit. But it feels to me in listening about how you've laid things out that there's going to be such long-term explicit benefits that were promised in your conversation today, and just some kind of benefits and takeaways that folks may realize even a long time after they've finished the course. So
I hope so.
it's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Paul and
You're
Jeff.
very
And
welcome.
yeah, wonderful.